This video was brought to you by the generosity of my supporters on Ko-fi. Thank you for supporting the channel. Hello my lovelies. My name's Gilbert Dolthalion and the plan for today is to talk about pressing. Now pressing is one of those things that I've been asked to do on the sewing dictionary quite a few times and I'm finally getting around to it, so sorry for the wait. Pressing is the act of applying heat, steam and or pressure to a fabric or a seam to help set it, and to help the stitches of a seam actually meld into the fabric itself. I would say it's the #1 thing that you can change to make your projects go from looking handmade to looking professional. What's the difference between pressing and ironing, you might ask? Well, ironing is something you do to a finished piece and involves moving the iron back and forth, forward and backwards on the fabric without lifting it. Pressing, on the other hand, is what you do to an unfinished piece of fabric or project, and involves placing the iron down on the fabric and then lifting it away without moving it on the fabric and deliberately putting it on the next spot. It should also ideally be done to the back of the project to prevent any damage to the fashion side of the fabric. So why the difference? It all comes down to grain, which I've spoken about before on the sewing dictionary. Ironing can disrupt the grain, pulling it out of alignment as you're dragging the iron along the fabric. Pressing, on the other hand, shouldn't move the fabric at all and therefore shouldn't move the threads. And the heat and steam can actually help reset the grain instead. If you have a piece of fabric that the grain is off on, the first thing to do is to wash and press it and to see if that helps. And of course, if you're working on something that's particularly sensitive to grain issues, such as hose or corsets, and you spend a lot of time making sure that your pieces are perfectly paced on the grain, the last thing that you want to do is anything that will disrupt it. But now that you know what it is and what it's used for, let's have a look at how it's done. The actual technique is very simple. This is ironing. My iron is on the correct settings for the fabric I'm working on, and I'm pushing it back and forth to work the wrinkles out of it. On the other hand, this is pressing. I'm not moving the iron on the fabric, but instead lifting it and deliberately placing it on the next spot. Each seam should be pressed once it's sewn, before you sew any seams that cross it or you finish the seam allowance, and make sure there aren't any pins still in your piece because they can leave an indent in the fabric or damage your iron. Your instructions might tell you to press a seam in a certain direction, but if they don't, then you'll want to make a decision based on the weight of your fabric and how you want to finish them. Heavy fabric should be pressed open if possible to reduce the bulk, but if you're doing something like a French seam, you'll want to press them closed. Despite that, press them open first to set the seam, and then reset them closed afterwards, with the seam excess in the direction that you want it. If you're doing something like darts and a direction hasn't been given, the general rule of thumb is to keep them in one direction on one side of the body, and then at the centre, back and front, change it to the other direction so the two sides are symmetrical. Even more so than with ironing, you want to pay careful attention to the fabric you're pressing and the settings of your iron. There's nothing worse than burning a project you've been carefully working on all day. This is why, if I'm shopping online or in a store that has content listed for its fabrics, I try and take a picture of it so I can keep it with the fabric. If you don't know exactly what your fabric content is, there are ways to test, and I'll link to a couple of videos that show you how. Remember to keep an eye on the steam, not just the heat. There's a whole host of tools and equipment you can use to help with pressing, and with ironing too. The 3 things I would say are essential are some sort of ironing board, an iron, and a pressing cloth. The ironing board and iron can be your everyday household equipment, but if you've ever looked at them, you'll know that irons can go from your basic 10-pound affair to big fancy steam tanks to gravity-fed irons. Generally, the things to look for are the same things that you'll look for in a household iron: good steam control, a large tank, a long cable, etc. Additional things that are useful for sewing are having a long shutoff cloth or none at all for when you're pressing large amounts of fabrics, although do be careful with that if you're absent-minded. And being physically heavy to help with things that need pressure like interfacing. When it comes to ironing boards, the most important thing is something that fits in your space. You can make your own with a wooden surface of some sort, some heat-resistant wadding, and a sturdy fabric over the top to make a nice cover, but don't feel that you need to if you don't have space for that. And a pressing cloth is for those times that you're pressing something delicate or need to press the top side of the fabric, but it can also protect your iron if you're pressing or ironing something with a zip or metal buttons. It should be colourless so the colour doesn't accidentally transfer, and something that can handle high temperatures, so undyed cotton is perfect. However, it doesn't have to be a new piece. Using old bed sheets or pillowcases is pretty traditional. While not technically necessary, a sleeve roll and a tailor's hand will make pressing a whole lot less frustrating. They're designed to fit under curved seams or inside hard to reach ones so that you can press them without having to make a mess. They can be brought, but honestly they're easy to make and are a great beginner project, so I actually really recommend having a go at making one yourself. I've linked the website I used to get the rough dimensions and shapes for mine, although I adjusted them to fit the pattern of the fabric that I have. There's also nothing to say that you can't make as many as you'd like in different sizes that you'll find useful, well, aside from physical space, of course. You'll want a sturdy fabric for the top and something with more texture for the bottom to help it keep from moving around as you're ironing, plus a lining depending on what you're filling them with. I used a canvas for the top side and a wool piece for the bottom, and then just some cotton for the lining, and all of these came from my scraps bin. Then it's just a case of cutting out the pieces and sewing them together, inserting a hook if you want to hang them, and leaving an opening at the bottom. You can fill them with cabbage or scraps if you want to cut them up small, or sawdust works too. And once that's done, close them with a ladder stitch, and that's it, easy as. The other tool you'll see me using a lot when pressing is my point turner, which is a little tool made to help push out sharp corners without accidentally going through them. I can also use it to apply pressure to those spots where I just can't get the iron in. Other tools that are useful but I don't have are sleeve boards, which are likewise designed for difficult corners and seams, but specifically the types of ones you get on sleeves, and a clapper, which can be put on a seam after it's pressed to help it set. Although I have used books for that in the past for seams I wanted extra sharp. You can also get needle boards for pressing fabrics with pile like corduroy or velvet. They have lots of little wire needles that you lay your fabric down on, the pile on the needles, so that you don't crush them as you press it. As you press more and more, you'll start to notice what's frustrating you and what sort of seams are coming up a lot that you might want an additional tool for, rather than buying them all at the outset. As someone who doesn't do a huge amount of detailed tailoring work, I've not yet needed a sleeve board, but if I was doing a lot of structured top pieces, I would probably have wanted one many years ago. I don't have a dedicated pressing cloth either. If I need one, I'll scrounge some fabric from my stash or a tea towel. I just don't work with delicate fabric often enough. So that's pressing. As I said earlier, it's the simplest technique that will make the biggest difference to your sewing. I found out about it embarrassingly late into my sewing journey, which is one of the difficulties in being self-taught. But looking back, I can see where I learned to do it and what a difference in quality it made to everything I did afterwards. The biggest tip that I can give you is to try and find a way to keep your ironing board out in your sewing space. Even if the best you can manage is one of those little travelling ones, not having to take it out and put it away for every seam will make it so much easier to make sure that you actually do it for every seam. If you're going to go about making your own, remember that you can set it on wheels, which will help you push it out of the way when you don't need it, and you can use the top as an additional surface if you need to. My ironing board and iron are the ones that we use for our household ironing. I just pull them out at the start of every project and pack them away when I tidy up at the end of every project so that they're out the whole way through. In fact, if you look at some of my sewing shots, you can see it in the background when I'm at the machine. My second tip is for everything that I said about the grain and pressing and making sure that you don't disrupt it, if you find yourself ironing a seam rather than pressing it, don't stress about it too much. Yes, ideally you should press them, and depending on what you're doing and how sensitive it is to grain issues, it will make a difference. But the most important thing is that you apply it and ironed to your seams no matter how you do it. Habit will take over sometimes, especially when you're in the middle of a big stressful project, and most of us iron more than we press unless you're a professional sewer. So obviously it's natural that you would revert to the technique that you're more used to in such a situation. If you catch yourself ironing, don't beat yourself up about it, but go back to pressing, and if you want, you can always go back and repress the seams that you know that you ironed instead of pressed. Remember to be kind to yourself. But with all that in mind, go forth and create something fantastic. Don't forget to check the description down below for additional reading links, and I really hope that you find that pressing helps elevate your sewing to the next level. Thank you for watching through to the end, and as always, a huge thank you to my lovely subscribers and to my very generous donators on Ko-fi. If you liked this or found it helpful in any way, please think about giving me a like or subscribing if you're not already for more sewing and costume related content, or donating to my Ko-fi if you're able. Stay safe, stay sensible, and I shall see you again soon. Bye! Put this too close. Let's just gently move it back. Yes, my name's Gilbert Dolthalion, and I use the ironing board to place my laptop because that's the best thing that I have. Welcome to the dodgy world of making YouTube.